How do you know if you're past your use-by date? It's a question that's been bothering me a little bit recently. I was made redundant, then I got a new job. I must be the oldest bloke there. I had one job previously because I work in technology, and I was definitely the oldest bloke there. So it's interesting that I want to keep working, and there's got to be a point where you know, enough's enough, right? I keep coming back to Tom from All Tied Up YouTube channel, retired at 56, now he's 58 or something like that, riding his motorbike around Thailand, living the dream, right? Yeah, I wouldn't say being 59, that's living the dream, is it? Being at work, being the oldest bloke there, but I'm making a buck. That's what's important. There's another bloke on YouTube, Walkabout Wayne, and he said what I would have done differently, and he's in early 50s or something like that, mid 50s. What I would have done differently when I moved to Thailand, and one of the things he said, I would have worked longer. And that's a common theme, isn't it? There's a tension between freedom and tethering yourself to a workplace to earn the money, to deserve that freedom, isn't there? But then, you know, you keep going and you keep going, and then eventually, it nearly happened to me last time when I was made redundant. You know, you kind of go, is that it? But, you know, Lazarus from the grave, live to fight another day, never say never. What is the criteria for when you're past your use-by date? I remember I worked with this bloke once. He was quite happy. He's a happy chappy, right? Some people are happy chappies. I'm not one of them. But he'd had high-pressure jobs, and he was just happy to sit there and do stuff, and it didn't bother him that it wasn't challenging or anything like that. For me, it does still bother me a bit. What he did to entertain himself, which was, you probably wouldn't get away with it these days with the likes of Spotify and that, but he used to buy CDs off eBay or wherever he got them from, or just buy them out of the shop, right? They don't have like Virgin Records and stuff, right? That's gone by the wayside. And then he used to rip them, digitise the content, then he used to resell them. And he said, mate, I said, and then he also used to use the company's postal system to do that, which, I said, what are you doing, mate? And he said, I'm posting out these CDs. He told me exactly what I just said here. And I said, oh, who's buying them? He said, mostly guys on naval ships who are not connected to the internet and they want to listen to music. And what's really interesting about that, as an aside, is that naval ships actually have their own postcode. So, because they're not in a fixed location, are they? So Australia Post is pretty clever, it figures it out. With the Telstra outage this week, massive Telstra outage, you know, Barnaby Joyce stood up and said, oh, you know, China launched a ballistic missile cyber attack. You know, we better check that out. I think apparently it was just some cock-up that took out, you know, a large part of the Telstra network on which I rely as well. Part of when you're past your use-by date is when you let fear and irrational thoughts like that, what Barnaby said, and he might have done it for political purposes, percolate into your thinking, right? Sometimes at work, you know, there's nothing much going on. Sometimes there's a huge amount going on. And then you sit there when there's nothing going on and you're kind of doing whatever you need to do. And you go, oh, you know, am I being excluded? You know, it's like, and a little bit of that thinking, which I didn't care about when I was younger, has crept back into my thought patterns. I don't like it, right? Please explain. You got to wonder, you know, in this insanity that's Australia in 2026, are the people running the joint actually past their use-by date as well? The Prime Minister's not looking that flash. He's certainly good at spin, you know, that's his primary skill. But, you know, the likes of Barnaby Joyce, Pauline Hanson, like, how are my kids actually going to relate to them? You know, I actually admire Pauline for her drive, and whatever you think of her politics, like she's on the go. It takes a lot of energy. I mean, same as like everyone, Trump's a really polarising figure, but like he's nearly 80 and he gets out of bed, he strings sentences together and he does stuff, and like, you know, it's quite impressive. When are you past your use-by date? I remember, good 15, 16 years ago, I was having a lot of difficulties with my mother, God rest her soul, and I didn't understand it was the onset of dementia. And I was trying to talk sense to her, and I wasn't getting through. I gave up in the end. It was too hard. And in the end, she ended up in aged care, and now she's not with us, God rest her soul. But I was talking with a bloke. He's a funny bloke, right? And I was just telling him this, about the difficulties with, you know, the mum who at that stage was, you know, into her mid-80s, early to mid-80s. And he said, mate, she's past her use-by date. Which is, you know, like, that's my mum. It's at the time I thought it was a rather cruel thing to say, but now I kind of understand what he means. So is even applying the concept of a use-by date, which is on a bottle of milk, to a human being, even, you know, fair and reasonable thing to do? Maybe not, but if you're in a workplace and, you know, you're the oldest bloke around, it gets you thinking, right? And at some point, they're going to take you off the shelf. It happens to sporting professional athletes all the time. I saw the other day, or yesterday actually, Gout, who's Australia's bloody fastest runner nearly. So he's 18. He's got a hammy. He's done a hamstring. He's got a hamstring injury, the most serious that's you can get. There's 12 months, and like, you know, he's the next Usain Bolt potentially, and that could be career limiting. Adidas paid him $6 million just to sponsor him because he's like phenomenal. But, you know, sporting stars all of a sudden, because it's tennis time, you know, Wimbledon, that, you know, Roger Federer, Nadal, they're all retired. They're retired on hundreds of millions of dollars. I think that's the use-by date, isn't it? And they still hang around. I saw Andre Agassi in the crowd, looking pretty fit. But these people retire early, and then what do you do with yourself, you know? So are you past your use-by date for what? For going to work, for doing stuff in retirement? There's a common sense rule that it says if you want to do the big lap of Australia, which for anyone who listens to this from America, it's driving all the way around Australia, which is about 35,000 kilometres or 40,000 kilometres. It takes about a year. You get your 4B in a caravan or something and you drive around the whole of Australia. It takes about a year. The common sense approach says do the big lap before you're 70, because your reaction time, your peripheral vision, your vision, your alertness, your ability to sit behind the wheel for 8 hours a day is compromised. That's common sense, right? But the grey nomads, heaps of people 75. There's a bloke across the street from me, he's 75 odd. He just pisses off for 3 months because it's bloody freezing here at the moment. So the final thought on are you past your use by date or getting close to it is that I've learnt from this recent period when I was involuntarily taken out of the workforce, and thankfully I have a new job, is it's going to happen. And, you know, like anyone, you got to plan for it. And I think this time around, when it happens, it won't be such a shock, and that's really important.